Histobiograph.
She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her servants obeyed the moment the bell rang, stepping barefoot across the black marble with heads bowed, hands folded like prayers. And always, always, they entered the bath chamber. But none of them ever came back out. That summer, the palace was choked in lavender-scented steam, a scent so thick it clung to hair and skin long after you had passed her wing. They said the mistress liked her bath scalding hot, drawn precisely at midnight. Rose petals floated on the surface like small wounds. Her rooms were lined with obsidian and candlelight, so warm, so fragrant, so inviting, that no one questioned why the door closed and locked from the inside. Not until the third servant disappeared. By then, it was too late. 11 were gone, all young, all loyal, all last seen carrying linens into the dark. The staff whispered, of course, about the copper tub that never stained, about the red film that sometimes coated the drain, about how the mistress never seemed to age, her skin flawless and pink as a newborn's palm. And yet no blood was ever found. No screams, no broken glass, only silence and the smell of roses. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing to Histobiograph 365. We uncover the truths they tried to burn, bury, and forget. She wore no crown. She held no formal title. Her name was struck from official records before her 27th birthday. And yet, her influence bled through every corridor. Even the queen once lowered her eyes when passing her in the garden. The only object she carried was a ring, a thick band of bronze carved with a single Latin phrase. It read, "Non reverter, he shall not return." They said her husband drowned on their wedding night, that the bath water turned red before midnight, that his bones were never recovered. Only his signet ring, wedged in the drain like a final protest. She wore it on a necklace made of braided hair, claimed it helped her sleep. No one dared ask who the hair belonged to. By the 5th disappearance, guards were posted outside her chamber. But no matter how many stood watch, no one ever heard a sound. The bath would be drawn, the servant would enter, and by morning, the tub would be empty. Spotless, warm, as if someone had just stepped out. One guard claimed to have looked through the keyhole. He said he saw her reclining in the water, smiling. He said she was humming, not a song, but something older. And beside the tub, steam curled around a pile of neatly folded clothes. No body, just steam. And a faint tapping sound, like fingernails on copper. He gouged out his own eye 3 days later. They sealed her chamber after the 12th, bricked the doorway shut, stripped her name from family trees, burned every letter, every portrait, every diary. But the tub remained. Decades later, during a restoration, masons uncovered a sealed room behind the east wall. Inside was the bath, still warm, still damp. And along the rim, barely visible in the flickering torchlight, were 11 names, scratched deep into the metal with something small, precise, desperate. A 12th name had been started, but never finished. And in the center of the tub, etched so faintly it was nearly erased by time, were 6 words. If I sink, I take you. But what if she was never supposed to be remembered?
They say it began with a letter, a folded parchment left beneath her door, sealed in wax that smelled of myrrh and old fire. The writing was angular, etched with the same phrase that adorned her ring. Non reverter, he shall not return. The paper contained no signature, Only a single instruction written twice, first in Latin, then in the dead tongue of the northern marshes. It said, "Place him in the bath, before the water cools." She followed the instruction. No one knows how. No one dared ask where she found his body. They say she wrapped him in silks, still dripping, and lowered him into the steaming tub as if baptizing him back into her womb. What came out was not a man. From that night on, the bath was never empty. Even when drained, even when scrubbed, even when left alone for weeks, there was always a thin layer of water at the bottom. Warm, red, still. The bath had memory. After her husband vanished, she was said to keep to herself. She dismissed the steward, the guards, the seamstress. Only the maids remained, and only the youngest ones. Girls who could barely read. Girls who asked no questions. Girls who needed the coin too much to run. They were always summoned at night, given instructions not to speak, to bring oils, to carry towels, to step close to the edge. Some said it was a ritual. Others said it was hunger. In the months that followed, strange signs began to appear. The eastern well dried completely. A raven circled the bathhouse for 12 days without landing. One morning, the palace cook found fish bones arranged on the kitchen tiles, spelling out her name. Still, no one accused her. She was untouched, untouchable. Her lineage traced back to the architects of the kingdom. Her great-grandmother was said to have lit the first eternal flame. Her blood carried ancient weight, and she knew it. At dawn, she walked barefoot into the chapel and laid her hand on the altar, whispering verses not found in scripture. At dusk, she stood in the garden and turned each rose stem until her fingers bled. The servants began to speak of dreams. Dreams of drowning. Dreams of warmth that turned to suffocation. One claimed to have heard her voice beneath the water. Another woke up, gasping with her name carved into his palm. Then the animals began to die. The cat was first, then the pigeons that roost under the eaves, then the 3 hunting hounds, found floating in the reflecting pool, mouths full of rose petals. But still the bath remained full and warm, waiting. One night, a girl who had served her for 3 months found a small scroll hidden beneath a loose tile beside the tub. It was wrapped in silk and sealed with a black ribbon. Inside, there were no words, only a drawing. A woman standing inside a copper basin, arms stretched upward, her face tilted to the sky. And above her, hovering like a shadow stitched into fire, was the outline of something enormous. Not quite a man, not quite a god, but watching. Beneath the drawing, scratched into the paper itself, were the same 6 words. "If I sink, I take you." She burned the scroll that night. But by morning, the girl was gone. Her slippers were still at the edge of the tub, damp, warm to the touch. They thought the horror ended with the 12th disappearance. The palace sealed her wing with mortar and prayer. The archbishop was summoned. Candles were lit from dusk to dawn. Psalms were recited in Latin and in silence. They believed they had contained her, that the bath, like her memory, could be buried. But memory does not rot. It stains. 3 months after the sealing, a young steward named Elias was assigned to inventory the unused quarters. He was 19, bright, newly appointed, and unaware of the door that had been bricked over behind a velvet tapestry. When he touched the wall, the stone hissed under his fingers. He found it by accident. The bricks were uneven, the air near them unnaturally warm. No one saw him after that day, and in the basin meant for holy water, someone had left a single copper ring. By nightfall, the tapestry had fallen. The bricks were cracked, and the bath behind them had refilled. The next morning, a trail of wet footprints led from the eastern corridor to the chapel. The altar was soaked. The laundress left her post after finding towels that smelled of iron. The butcher refused to deliver meat after his knives began to rust overnight. The head gardener found red veins threading through the roots of the roses, pulsing like arteries. That the bath was dry, that the ring was never real. But the servants whispered. They always did, licking its paws beside a trail of pink water. The child was never seen again. Non reverteter. She said the mistress was still bathing, that she was still waiting for someone to join her. The palace tried to deny it. They said Elias had run away, because they remembered. Still burning. Except, this time, something floated just below it. One by one, the old staff began to resign. One cook poured boiling water into the drain near the east wing and swore he heard a woman exhale. No one spoke above a whisper. No one walked barefoot anymore. No one noticed he was missing until the scent returned. with the scent of roses and the warmth of a body that is not yours. But silence does not erase the scream. It only stretches it. One evening, a young boy chasing a stray cat wandered into the forbidden wing. He was 5. Rose and something else. They found the cat curled up at the end of the hallway, alive. A chambermaid named Lisa was the first to speak the truth aloud. She stood in the servants' dining hall, hair unbraided, eyes wide with a kind of fear that comes only when belief breaks. They laughed at Lisa. She left that night with a candle and a rosary and walked into the east wing. In the morning, her candle was found at the threshold. Inside the chamber, nothing had changed. The walls were warm. The tub was full. The surface of the water completely still. A ribbon, tied in the style only Lisa wore. The steward who retrieved it went blind in his left eye 2 days later. He said the water had blinked at him. Now, no one enters that wing. The door is nailed shut. The hallway covered in salt. But the bath still calls. Not with sound, but with memory. And on some nights, if you stand very still near the sealed wall, you might hear the faint sound of dripping. Not water, something thicker. And you might feel a breath that is not yours on the back of your neck. Because the price of silence was never paid in full.
The bath began to speak, not with words, not with a voice, but with memories that did not belong to those who heard them. It started with the painter. He had been hired to restore the eastern corridor, to repaint the ceilings with scenes from the Old Testament. A man of logic, a man of color and scaffolding and oils. When asked, he could not explain where he had learned it. When pressed, he admitted it came to him in sleep. 3 days into his work, he began to hum a tune no one recognized, slow, hollow, lacking rhythm. On the 7th night, he painted her, the woman in the bath, but without a face. Instead, there was steam, and under the water, bones arranged like fingers reaching upward. Scratched into it, barely visible beneath soot and ash, was the same phrase found in the tub. Not the mistress as she had once been, but something older. He left the palace before sunrise, said nothing, vanished from the records. But the painting remained. They tried to remove it, but the paint would not lift. They tried to cover it, but moisture seeped through the new layer, bleeding crimson through every brushstroke. The queen ordered it destroyed. It burned, but the wall behind it blistered and cracked, revealing the original brickwork. If I sink, I take you. After that, no one entered the east wing alone. But the bath was no longer content to stay hidden. Another claimed to have seen petals floating in her wash basin, though she had used no flowers. The butler, in passing the sealed corridor, dropped his tray when he heard a splash on the other side of the wall. One of the queen's handmaids reported waking with wet hair, though her room was dry. A woman named Myrea, fluent in forgotten tongues, trained in the rites of cleansing. She asked for no protection, no company, only salt and a bell. He insisted it was laughter. The king's chaplain was sent to investigate. A quiet man, trusted, brave. The torches along the eastern halls flickered blue, and from beneath the marble a sound rose like thousands of wet hands clapping in rhythm. Only the book returned, every word unreadable except for a single phrase on the last page. It was soaked through, its ink bled into spirals. She never left the water. They buried the chaplain without a body. The queen, desperate to reclaim her palace, summoned a scholar from the high monastery. It showed the tub, open at the bottom like a mouth, and beneath it, a darkness shaped like a woman. Waiting, listening to every footstep, every whisper, every attempt to forget, not in form, but in presence. She was not watching. She was remembering. She spent 2 nights reading in the royal library and 1 full day kneeling at the sealed wall. At midnight, she entered the chamber. What followed was not silence. The servants heard the walls groan. Then nothing. In the morning, Myrea stood in the doorway. Her robe was dry, her hair untouched. She spoke only once. It is not the bath that takes them. It is what lives beneath. But she left behind a drawing, a single page found tucked under a candlestick. And she was not alone, because deep inside the copper lining of that tub, something had been moving, and now it was remembering us.
There was a door in the east wing of the manor that no one dared approach, let alone open. It was made of blackened oak, swollen from time, its surface veined like dried skin. Wrapped in red ribbon, stained and brittle, it was accompanied by a note written in smudged charcoal. Do not open what watches you back. The lock, forged of iron and shaped like an open mouth, had not been turned in decades, or so they thought. But servants claimed to hear soft clicking at night, always around the same hour, as if the room were breathing or remembering. When the estate changed hands and a team arrived to catalog the property, they found an old key hidden in the baseboard of the west staircase. They opened it anyway. The room smelled of burnt jasmine and rusted copper. Candles, long dead, had melted into pools that clung to the wood floor like dried blood. In the center stood a writing desk, surrounded by chairs facing outward, as if once there had been an audience or a trial. The desk was immaculate. Notebooks were stacked with obsessive precision, each bound in soft leather, each labeled with a single year. Always her, smiling, her skin flawless, glistening, her eyes hollow with joy. Red dripped from her hair as if she had just emerged from a crimson sea. The first was dated over 30 years before her disappearance. She did not plan it. The girl had fallen, cracked her skull, and bled into the bathwater. Out of grief, or madness, she stepped into it. By morning, the pain in her joints was gone. By noon, her lesions had faded. Her confession, inside, written in a trembling hand that seemed to lose strength with each sentence, was her final letter. Notes like too freckled, laughs too much, bone density ideal. She kept records. She tracked changes in her skin, her voice, the elasticity of her muscles. I would become the mother of new queens. They would sip me like tea. She even recorded dreams, some of which she swore were prophetic. They told me it was punishment from the womb, that I had been chosen to suffer. I did not believe them. There were sketches as well, delicate anatomical renderings, drawn with the eye of someone who had studied bodies not in theory, but in practice. The last bore no date. Only a single word carved into the cover, harvest. Inside, page after page listed names, most of them unfamiliar, many crossed out. Ages followed. Hair color, skin tone. Tucked into the spine of one journal was a lock of hair, pressed flat between 2 pages. Beneath it, a line, she sang while dying. I wept while bathing. At the far end of the room, behind a tattered velvet curtain, they found the mirror. They call me by name. They do not forgive. They did it because they saw something in the mirror. Not her, not their reflections, but something watching, as if waiting for a name to be called again. It was grotesque. The glass rippled unnaturally, as though disturbed by unseen hands. The frame had been carved from ivory, but the figures along its edge were not decorative, they were screaming. One figure, a child with stitched lips, appeared to move slightly when the light flickered, and the mirror did not reflect the room. It showed her. Beneath the mirror lay a sealed envelope, the wax pressed with the family crest. I was born in rot. My skin peeled with the morning air. She described the first time she bathed in the blood of a young maid. It was mercy, she wrote. And once tasted, mercy becomes a hunger. She convinced herself it was science. That innocence, when taken before the spirit hardened, contained an essence that reversed decay. I saw myself walking across centuries, she wrote, unbreaking, unbending, unaging. But toward the end, her writing cracked. They whisper in the walls. The pipes hum with their humming. The water turns red when no one bleeds. I see their hands on the glass. The final line was nearly illegible, as if her hand could no longer bear the weight of what she wrote. Do not drain the bath. It remembers where the bodies are buried. When the team sealed the door again, they did not do so out of superstition. And no one dares to say her name aloud now, not even the house. Years have passed since the estate was shuttered, sealed by law and ritual. The gardens have choked themselves with ivy. The windows, once gleaming with imported glass, are now scabbed with dust and regret. Yet no matter how tightly the gates are locked, stories still escape. A girl from the village says she heard weeping behind the eastern wing. A man hiking the old path swears he saw someone in white watching from the balcony. And in the archives of a crumbling university, a professor stumbled upon a letter that bore the same seal as the one found in the manor, the seal of House Varennes. Inside that letter was not a confession, but a warning, not addressed to the past, but the future. The hunger never left. I buried it beneath etiquette, behind perfume, under silk. But it grows restless when no one watches. And if you are reading this, the mirror has opened again. The professor vanished 3 weeks later. No one claims to have seen the mirror since, but a replica appeared in an antique shop in Bruges. No paperwork, no price tag, no owner. A sign placed below it reads, "Speak gently to what listens." What does it mean to inherit evil? Was she born monstrous? Or did centuries of silence mold her into something unspeakable? The villagers called her a witch. Historians now debate whether she was merely sick, deluded, or part of a cult that predates royal records. But none of that explains why so many vanished, why their names were never carved into stones, why their faces never aged in family portraits. The bath remains dry, but sometimes, when the storm clouds gather low over the hills, crimson seeps from the base of the house like ink bleeding through paper. And the walls groan, not like wood, but like memory, like bone. One servant's journal, smuggled out by her sister, survives in a hidden drawer of a monastery in France. Its last entry is only 3 words. She was kind. It's easy to judge from afar, easy to call her a monster. But monsters do not write poetry in blood. Monsters do not weep into their own reflections or beg empty rooms for forgiveness. Maybe she believed it was love. Maybe she thought death was a gift when wrapped in warmth. Or maybe, just maybe, no one told her she could stop. The past does not speak in absolutes. It leaves whispers in locked rooms and scars in the soil. It asks us not to decide, but to remember, not to forgive, but to understand. And in the end, history does not bury its monsters. It waits until we look in the mirror and realize the reflection never belonged to her alone. Megaphone, if you felt a chill just now, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, share, and let history speak again.